Let me start. So I was the person who closed our regular seminars last academic year, and so I'm the person who opens our regular seminars this year. So just a few words about new outline of our regular seminar. So now we have press-related papers. I do my best hope that all of you could have access to it. So as far as I remember, Alexei Romanov sent it by mail last Saturday, so I expect that all of you will give me good comments and advices based on paper as well, not only on my presentation. And the outline of our seminar today will be, so my presentation is about, I hope, 30 minutes. Then floor will be given to discussant. Today it is Veronika Kostenko, and then so comments, remarks, discussions, and so on so far. Okay, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. My presentation is titled Nationalism in the USSR, Comparative and Historical Perspective, and I really hope that it will be the last presentation of mine on this project. I hope now it's almost completed manuscript, and at least for the moment I regard it as a final presentation and almost completed manuscript, which is ready for submission at least to the HSC working paper series. So I will be very thankful for all your comments regarding it as a manuscript. So just to remind, so what is my project about? So this project about rise of nationalist movements in ethnic regions, but not now in the USSR or Yugoslavia, that was on the last presentation, but only in the USSR. So just to remind you that initially my project included only ethnic regions within Russia, so what means Russian Federation, but now I decided to expand my sample up to 49 ethnic units, so now it's the Soviet Union. And this project deals with the nationalism, rise of nationalist movements, and the main broad question is how may one explain nationalism in Soviet ethnic republics. Should be treated as a kind of deviation related to the collapse of communist states, or it has deeper roots. My broad theoretical framework is a modernist approach to nationalism. So main authors are Benedict Anderson, Ernst Gellner, Miroslav Hrok. So all of them stress the importance of education, science and technology as keys to emergence of nationalism. And Hrok also stressed the importance of national movements and national intellectuals who establish these movements. Two most important authors for me are, nevertheless, David Layton, who in his book Nation State Violence argued that nationalism is a privilege of rich societies, that only rich societies may afford to invest, spend resources in inventing, maintaining, spreading traditions, and Dmitry Gorenburg, who argued about the existence of two nationalisms. Political nationalism, which is separatism, and cultural nationalism, which is the policy of support of national language, culture, traditions, beliefs, and so on. So, just one slide on definitions of this nationalism, of these two versions of nationalism. In the literature, one may find a few pieces on cultural nationalism. For instance, in a recent book by Kay Darden, he focuses on the effects of pre-Soviet schooling systems in Ukraine on anti-Soviet insurgency. Just in few words, that he took two Ukrainian regions in western Ukraine, Transcarpathia and Ivano-Frankivsk region. And his question was how to explain that these two very similar regions, they're just different slopes of the Carpathians. One region was the core of anti-Soviet insurgency in the late 40s, and another one was absolutely quiet and had no anti-Soviet insurgency at all. And his response was that it's pre-Soviet schooling, pre-Soviet education, that both regions being the part of Austro-Hungarian Empire, one of them was ruled by Hungarians, who suppressed Ukrainian nationalist movements, and another one was ruled by Austrians, who endorsed Ukrainian nationalist movement and also endorsed Ukrainization in the schooling system. David Layton, in his numerous works, stressed the importance of language standardization and language rationalization. He stressed the importance of official language linguistic repertoire in post-communist countries as well. And Roger Brubaker focused on so-called nation-shaping nationalism, so nationalism of emerged states. He stressed the salience of cultural issues for this politics. And to sum up, this study stressed importance of language in education, and in my paper I focus both on the importance of language in education for political nationalism. Another concept which is very important for me is the concept of ethnic institutions. So it's institutions related to language, culture, history. So these institutions, in other words, produce intellectuals. These institutions create jobs for intellectuals, or intelligentsia. And this intelligentsia later becomes the driving force of political mobilization during political crisis. Just few reasons, at least, that intellectuals they create grievances, ethnic grievances. They spread them. They participate in educational process, and they create social networks among young people. And cultural and educational institutions and organizations, they have some essential resources which are important on the initial phase of political mobilization. So the level of ethnic institutions development depended on the region status in official Soviet administrative hierarchy. So the higher status was, the more possibilities, more opportunities for the development of these institutions this region had. And the four-level hierarchy was in the Soviet Union, so you can see it on the slide. And just another few remarks on cultural nationalism. So it's a sometimes unintended byproduct of government policies that Soviet Union, being a communist multi-ethnic federation, stressed the salience of nationalist policy. It was an important part of its political agenda. The goal of the Union government was maintenance of inter-ethnic peace, creation of supra-ethnic identity, prevention of secession of any republic, and one of the solutions was cultural autonomy. And Soviet government failed in achieving most of these goals. So, and my model is that the policy of cultural nationalism leads to emergence of ethnic institutions. They create jobs for intelligentsia, culture, education, intellectuals in the future, establish ethnic movements, and these ethnic movements, they produce political nationalism. So they put new goals in political agenda, so it's political nationalism. And I apply comparative historical approach. I expect that dependency effect, that political nationalism in the late 80s and 90s was predicted by developments in the past, and so my dependent variable would be political nationalism in the late 80s and 90s, and my independent variable, cultural nationalism in previous periods. So I split the entire period of the Soviet rule in 5 periods. So it's October Revolution and the Civil War, or the second one is the period of state aid, nation building in 20s and 30s, then the period of great power Russian nationalism in the 40s and 50s, and then the late Soviet period, nativization of trust the local elites, and the last period is the period of perestroika, collapse of the USSR, and the crisis of the new Russian state. I also add another factor into my model, formal status in religion. So this is just outline of periods of nationalism in the Soviet Union. So the first period is a period of political nationalism, then 3 periods of cultural nationalism, and the last period is a period of political nationalism. I include 49 cases in my sample, so it's 14 Union republics, then 21 Russian autonomous republics, 11 national administrative districts, 3 non-Russian autonomous republics, it's Abkhazia, Nakhchivan, and Nagorno-Karabakh. So I also attempted to include another regions like South Ossetia, Adjaria in Georgia, Transnistria in Moldova, Crimea in Ukraine, but I failed to collect enough data to create my indices. And so my first step in the empirical strategy was to measure political nationalism and cultural nationalism and create indices of political and cultural nationalism respectively. So how to measure political nationalism? So my approach is not based on surveys. I code historical trends and events. So here I follow the approach by Daniel Dreisman and Elias Juliana. For the late Soviet period, I use from 14 to 16 indicators, coded usually as 0, 1. And then convert this data in 0-1 scale. So here you see indicators colored in 3 different colors. So black color says that these indicators go to both union and autonomous republics. Green, so indicators in green color go only to autonomous republics, and indicators colored in red color go only to union republics. So because of different status in the Soviet political hierarchy, so one could observe different political processes, and therefore, so these indicators differ in this period. In the contrast, for the early Soviet period, I have just unified sample of indicators, so just 9 of them. So they applied to all ethnic regions. So how cultural nationalism is measured indirectly. So I cannot. So my main explanatory concept is intellectuals or intelligentsia. So I failed to find data on the size and volume and ethnic composition of intelligentsia in each ethnic region. Therefore, I measure this concept indirectly via items which are associated with jobs for intellectuals, books, language students. So, like more books in native language means more jobs for writers and scholars. More students in universities means more jobs for intellectuals, and let's say more people who speak titular language as their primary language, so also means like say the success of intelligence, let's say. And I construct index of cultural nationalism for 3 periods. This is a mistake, no Yugoslavia here. So this index consists of 3 variables: books in native language, title language as primary language, and students. And so the index is a mean of these variables. I also include in some models formal status and non-orthodox religion. My main argument is that cultural nationalism predicts political nationalism, and I use structural equation modeling here. So my first model contains only links between periods without like cross links, and so despite all coefficients being significant, and basically so it's good for me, but my fit indices are quite poor, and so this model is better to reject. Next model includes also cross-temporal links between periods, and fit indices are much better. So for me, the most important things here are significant positive coefficients between last period of cultural nationalism and late political nationalism, and also between cultural nationalism in 40-55 and cultural nationalism in 56-85. So here one may see that the coefficient is the strongest, and at least one may see that the coefficients between cultural and political nationalisms and between cultural nationalism are stronger than coefficient between 2 periods of political nationalism. And cross-links, cross-temporal links, cross-period links, they also significant, and so basically supports my hypothesis. The insignificant coefficient between period of cultural nationalism in 1925-39 and 1940-55 can be explained as a radical break in the Soviet nationalities policy in this period. So it's, let's say, in the Terry Martin words, it's a break between the affirmative action empire policy and great power Russian nationalism policy. Next model includes religion as additional factor. So the fit indices are quite good. So model fits data, and religion has indirect effect on political nationalism as well, but coefficients are lower comparing to, let's say, coefficients between periods of cultural nationalism and political nationalism. And my interpretation would be that, let's say, the policy of cultural nationalism is a state-run policy, and religion is a primordialist factor, so it has nothing with the government policies. And here one may see that, let's say, the government policies have stronger effect on political nationalism than religion. And the last model here includes the formal status as well. So formal status is the status of republic of any ethnic unit in the official Soviet administrative hierarchy. The fit indices are also not bad. All the significant links are shown, and coefficient 0 between periods of early political nationalism and cultural nationalism mean that this link was made equal to 0 to improve model, but nevertheless, main theoretically most important for me coefficients are significant positive. religion again has only an indirect effect, and its coefficient is lower than coefficient of cultural nationalism, and formal status is shown has only indirect effect via cultural nationalism on political nationalism. My results show that all these models provide some support for my main argument, that there is a significant relationship between cultural and political nationalism in the Soviet history, that one may argue that cultural nationalism predicts political nationalism, that there is a radical change between periods 1926-39 and periods 1940-55. The most important period is the last period of cultural nationalism, so it provides statistical testing for statistical support for the main argument of Dmitry-Gorenburg, and religion has some predictive power, but it's not so strong as cultural nationalism, the policy of cultural nationalism. As conclusion, so I guess that my three main contributions to the field are, the first one, it is a methodological contribution for studying nationalism. So usually such papers are based on either on surveys or on, let's say, on pure historical methodology, let's say historical narratives, reference to sources. My approach is a kind of quantification of history, so I try to bridge history and political science, not losing, let's say, historical contents. I try to code historical trends and events into variables and apply conventional statistical methods. Secondly, I think that my results challenge the concept of cultural autonomy as a solution for multi-ethnic states, that the basic communist idea and the domain of nationalities policy was to provide almost all ethnic groups, or at least, let's say, relevant ethnic groups with some attributes of quasi-sovereignty, like territory, title, titular language, titular culture, and so on, such cultural issues. And there was the idea that nationalism is a communication tool to, let's say, communism and socialism, that in that way ethnic groups would be delivered the communist message, and the cultural autonomy was regarded as a solution of the nationality question, the national question. So my paper challenges this issue, that latent cultural nationalism in fact led to the rise of political nationalism during political crisis. And thirdly, my paper provides statistical testing of the break in the Soviet nationality policy on the studies, and basically one may see on most of models that there is that dependency starting since the period of cultural nationalism 1940-55 up to the perestroika, but before usually there is a break in this policy. And my paper provides some statistical tests, some statistical support for this finding, which was in previous literature. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now I give floor to Nika.
Okay. So we first discuss and then ask questions, right?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much, Andrey, for a very nice paper, and I'm really impressed by the scope of the paper because it's like really bold.
Do you hear us?
Nika, can you speak to the mic, because it's very difficult.
I can speak closer to the mic, I think. It will be better. Huh?
You could take my chair.
I just wanted to say that I'm really impressed by the scope of this paper, which is really broad, and by the very ambitious goal that Andrey put in the research. So I've read the paper very carefully, and it's fairly interesting to read, first of all. So it's just a very good text. So, and I believe that this approach is very fruitful due to certain limitations of the Soviet statistics. So it's very hard to use Soviet data, and this approach actually doesn't have to deal with it. So that's why it's very fruitful, and we don't have to cope with this bias of Soviet statistics. But still, I found several things I wanted to discuss, and I have several questions, and probably some of them would lead to clarification. So first of all, I want to start with theory and the discussion of these historical events. So Andrey has a goal to tell about nationalism in the Soviet Union in like 10 pages, which is a very ambitious goal by itself, because nationalism was, you know, it's a very changing concept, and it's definitely hard to do. And that's why this actual goal leads to a certain simplification of the facts. And I found several places where this simplification leads to phrases which can be perceived as mistakes of history. So, for example, in some places you tell things like, well, you speak about Tsarist Empire, and like that's page 9, for example, and you're speaking about Russian Empire's nationalism and nationalism of the last emperors, and your phrase is that because of this, the World War I led to the collapse of the Tsarist Empire, which is a real simplification. It was one of the reasons, but we cannot like tell this as an axiom, right? So I would recommend to maybe reread this part to make sure you don't have phrases like that. And so I had another comment on page 16. Yeah, so for example, about Chechens and the perception of Russian leaders of Chechens as backward nations and not worth negotiating and compromising. So maybe phrases like that should be avoided, or at least maybe it's a good idea to put several explanations. So this is just about the historical part. The second thing, which I found quite important, is that theories that you show are, first of all, these are only nationalist theories, and I found a little disproportion. So you speak quite a lot about Dmitry-Gorenburg theory, which is very appropriate, but still you tell just three sentences about several others, and have 3 or 4 pages on Dmitry-Gorenburg theory. Maybe it should be a little bit more evenly spread. Then I would say that the link of theories and data is not that evident. So maybe it's a good idea when you describe your theories to put hypotheses right there. So, and maybe even mark them with like H1, H2 signs, because otherwise it's like a very good narrative, but it's a little bit hard for a reader to drive your hypothesis from the theory straight to the data. So then I would say that maybe it's a good idea to, you could find some other explanations of the events that we see in the data theoretically. So, for example, you could explain that by power and power division theories, like, I don't know, work like Charles Tilly and things like that, and patron-client relations theories when the dominant state is unable to satisfy the demands of the other state financially or intellectually, and nationalism that exists latently transforms this into political protest, right? So it could be not only nationalism per se, but other theoretical approaches like patron-client or something like that. Maybe you could think about it and introduce some more theoretical approaches into. Because, you know, when you see this, like, political protest, cultural, political again, you can see that this political nationalism happens in the times when the state is the weakest. So it can imply some more theoretical explanations. And one more thing I've mentioned, that when you explain your structural equation modeling results, maybe it lacks discussion session, I would say, that you have one-page conclusion and it feels a little bit not enough because, for example, there is a very interesting part in the last model, I believe, that religion has explanatory effect on only one period, when religion was not strong, in fact, right? So the 80s was not the peak of religion. But it still has some effect. So, and maybe it's a good idea to talk more on this in your, maybe to expand your conclusion into a discussion and conclusion and try to explain why in this particular period religion plays a role and in others it doesn't. And well, I would doubt that, for example, religion is a primordial factor because it can be a construct as well as nation. And, you know, religion is also, well, it's perceived by many scholars as a non-primordial factor. So, I would say that it's a great achievement that you prove this radical change of nationalist policy and nationalist discourse between this periods before the war and after the war. That's just cool. I like that part very much, and maybe it deserves more you know, like more wording on that in the end. So that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will try to respond to some of these comments.
Can we see you? Guys, can we see not the slides but you? Can you switch the camera?
Okay, just a second.
Okay, great. So we have a double thank you picture.
I will try to respond on some of these comments. Yes, I will agree with you that perhaps in some places my historical narrative of the Soviet nationalism and nationalist policies looks a bit simplified, but if Kirill Zhivkov was here, he would definitely tell me that it's a topic for a book. and in this place, I would agree with him that yes, I cannot place too much historical narrative in the paper format. Here I try to leave only the most important parts. And so it's not like a textbook on Soviet historical and some Soviet nationalist policy.
That's true, and I understand that completely. But I'm just telling that it's good to avoid phrases that are too,
Yes. I would agree. Then, theoretical part, yes. Here I'd like to collect more suggestion on lit review part, where I'm mostly interested with the issues of the cultural nationalism, like papers and authors who focus on these issues at least to some extent. Yes, and more theories, like more historical or empirical evidences are welcomed from you. That's it. Yes, and perhaps I will try to expand my discussion session. So, but yes, now because it's not, let's say, progress paper, but it's almost a final version of the project. So I always look at the word count. Right. Yes, and so my goal now, my task now, how to cut as many words as possible, but not to expand any parts. And so I had some difficulties when I had initially like 14,000 words, and then I came up with, let's say, 9,000 or 8,000, and so it was a sacrifice for me.
Yeah, but I will sacrifice some more historical discussion, but have more on on your results, because your results that you are available here, this is your main contribution.
Okay, Moscow.
Yeah.
Okay, I have two small comments. This phrase that your central argument that political nationalism is predicted by cultural nationalism. Well, it's important and
I don't hear you.
Oh, okay.
Now you will see.
I would suggest that you understand that, well, on one hand, political nationalism and cultural nationalism are closely connected, and it's kind of intuitive and evident. And but political nationalism is not only the cause of cultural nationalism, and you should state somehow in the paper that you understand that it is not. Well, it's not the only predictor, and that your model doesn't explain the whole thing, because I mean mainly in well, I mean to put it in a more broad perspective. And my second comment is about the measures of cultural nationalism. It is sometimes not clear, especially with these books in native language and with the students, why do you put these specific indices? For example, 1.1 or like, yes, and with the religion 0.25, maybe you should explain it somehow in the paper, because it's not quite clear why it's like this. That's it.
Some more comments? Yeah, we have some more comments, and then...
Hello, everyone. Oh,
it will be okay.
okay. One thing I would like to discuss is that when I was reading the paper, one moment is still unclear for me. I still do not understand the correct mechanism between political and cultural nationalism, because I still do not understand how cultural nationalism promotes political nationalism. What is the mechanism?
I also have some minor comments, because I do agree with Anna. It was not so clear for me as well. But I have some minor comments to the paper. Maybe it will be, how to say it, more... it will be easy to sell the paper if you would structure, for example, the literature review not like it is done here, but in a more logical thing, like by not just listing the papers and in the years that this one did this one, this author claimed this, and etc., but to provide some kind of discussion already there. Why do you use these papers and that? And I would suggest to shorten this part, because the part of literature is much bigger than the part of the results, but it should be vice versa. And then in the part of results, on page where you describe your model by saying that you use structural equation modeling. So I would suggest usually in the papers people put some links on the first or very well-known papers that are using this method already. Even if it is well-known, like structural equation modeling, it's a good thing to have the link on the papers, methodological papers, explaining what is the model is about. And also when you are saying that it allows testing path dependency relationship between variables, I would put between latent variables, because equation modeling not necessarily allows to test path dependency between all variables, but the case here is that you're having latent variables, as I can see. No? But then how?
Without latent variables. As far as I understand, Andrey, am I right? You are using path analysis without latent variables?
No. He said that he uses structural equation modeling to test path dependency relationship between variables. My claim was to put here also latent, the word latent before variables. But it's a very small one. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, so starting from the last comment, initially there was an attempt to construct cultural nationalism as a latent variable made of its elements, but the model was not identified. So not so many cases, and therefore, so I came up with just index constructed as a mean of 3 variables. Yes, you're right that I have to include some links, some references on methodological papers. Mechanism between political and cultural nationalism. So the idea is that the logic of cultural nationalism is the emergence and maintenance of so-called ethnic institutions. So like national educational organizations, like universities, it's national research centers. Union republics, for example, had their own academies of science, like Azerbaijani Academy of Science, Armenian Academy of Science, like Ukrainian Academy of Science. They had their own publishing houses. They had schools where native titular language was a mean of instruction. They had like national theaters, museums, like magazines, and so on and so forth. So the idea was to provide ethnic groups with some kind of cultural autonomy through emergence of these ethnic institutions. So they were formal, what I want to say. And that led to creation of numerous jobs that had to be filled with titulars or native speakers. So like in Armenian Academy of Science, Armenians had to be employed. Let's say in Azerbaijani publishing houses, like Azerbaijani intellectuals had to be employed, and so on and so forth. So this led to production, and perhaps in some cases to overproduction of national intellectuals, national intelligentsia. And in the last period of the Soviet rule, as Gorenburg and other authors showed in their papers, in their studies, these national intellectuals became the driving force of political mobilization. They established ethnic movements, being as mostly intellectual leaders, like for instance, there was a description of Tatarstan where Tatar intellectuals complained that they were the only generation of Tatar intellectuals because before Tatars had no broad mass access to education, and in the recent future Tatars would be completely Russified, and all intellectuals would be speaking Russian as their primary language. And so this is the logic of connection between cultural nationalism and political nationalism. So, and intelligentsia established ethnic movements, and these ethnic movements raised political issues during the perestroika in the late ages, and in the Russian Federation in the early mid-90s, during the period of political crisis. Lead review. Yes, I would agree with you. Basically, it was also the point of Nika that more theories, perhaps more empirical evidences, would be better for my paper. So I welcome you to bring me some new ideas, some new insights. What papers could I also include? Basically, what I have found, I try to include in my text. And measurement, I try to be within scale 0-1 in most of cases, and so to some extent, so the values assigned were arbitrarily, so it was an arbitrary solution to assign these values, except the case of political nationalism, with what I found in papers of Daniel Dreisman and Elis Juliana. I found no papers where such proceedings were used. So therefore, it was some kind of my solutions. Okay, same. So if you don't have other comments right now, I will give the floor to the St. Petersburg audience. So please, welcome. If you have any
What? You do not have Edward with you, so no comments. Okay. Chris, ask a question.
Chris, do you have any?
No, well, I mean, I have the same general comment that I had. I think I heard you present on similar data a while ago. I don't know, it might have been a year ago or something like this, but of course the setup was completely different. And my question here, as someone who's completely ignorant to nationalism research, is still, what about the Russian nation? And particularly the contemporary context. If you were going to be predicting, for example, current outcomes in political and cultural nationalisms within the Russian territory, then there's the question of how these other nations are interacting with the majority Russian nation, both in terms of legislation that might be promoting or taking away their autonomy, or more cultural programs that might be promoting, I don't know, Russian language as opposed to other languages in these areas. And I don't know if you're still dealing with that issue at all, or if there's a way that you're capturing it, or if it's completely irrelevant. but from my point of view, of course, in the Soviet period, as you displayed, it was of course very important that there was also a Russian nation within the Soviet Union, although, and of course, a lot of these other nationalisms were interacting with it. And so my question involves that and whether that still can be focused on today.
In fact, it's a very interesting and very important question. I would say so. To some extent, these issues outside the scope of this paper, because yes, as you're right, I'm mostly dealing with the minority nationalism and let's say nationalities policy of the Soviet government. But still, so the issue of let's say of Russian nationalism is still quite important. I was thinking to write about it, let's say, either a different paper or different chapter, as Kirill Zhirkov would say, would have said. Yes, when we look at the Soviet nationalities policy, one may see that there is some kind of pendulum swing from, let's say, more liberal policy, if the very term liberal is appropriate for the Soviet context, to more so, let's say, conservative policy. For instance, in the early 20s, in the 20s, the approach was almost anti-Russian. So there was the so-called the great danger approach, where the great power Russian nationalism was treated as a greater danger compared to the minorities nationalism, and therefore, let's say, minorities were treated much better than, let's say, Russians. And Terry Martin, in his excellent book, The Affirmative Action Empire, shows that how Russian and anti-Russian sentiments were spread, let's say, among Russians and non-Russians. Then one may see, let's say, a radical shift that in the late 30s, Stalin introduced a completely new approach, let's say, great power Russian nationalism, that all possible anti-Russian sentiments were banned, any negative attitudes towards Russians, Russian culture were prohibited and persecuted. Bourgeois nationalism was blamed now as a, let's say, as a treason to communism, despite the fact that just 5 years ago, let's say, still in the early 30s, let's say, former nationalists were invited by the Soviet government from emigration, and let's say, former Ukrainian nationalists were given such posts as let's say, the head of Ukrainian Academy of Science, and so the attitude toward them was quite positive. And then we see another pendulum swing in the, let's say, in the 50s, in the 60s, that the official attitude towards the balance between, let's say, Iran, let's say, ethnic majority and ethnic minority was different again. That no one was allowed to challenge the Russian dominance in the Soviet Union, but local elites were given much more freedom. Let's say the Soviet government, let's say, unofficially announced that no more mass purges along ethnic lines would be allowed in any future. So let's say, let be peace not only with outside world, but also within the Soviet Union. So but then in the 70s there was a slight attempt to establish a new super-ethnic identity, like a Soviet citizen, and many nationalities, many ethnic groups used to consider it as a new version of Russian imperialism, new version of, let's say, great power Russian nationalism. And in the 80s, so basically it became an issue again. So it's a balance between the interest of Russian majority and ethnic minorities. So in fact, this issue is outside my scope. So I would prefer to give more space to these issues in my, let's say, in my historical part. But it would take too much space in this paper. Yes, that's it.
Thank you very much. questions here.
Some Pittsburgh pods should ask questions now.
What's that?
Some Pittsburgh should ask questions. We are the winners today. For questions.
Okay.
Fortunately, we don't have to wait further